Okay, now we're back. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. I collect them and add them and we get to them at the end during our little question session. So, and as always, if there was something that came up since we've gone over the photographs or the documents in the past sessions, please feel free to ask those as well, especially at the end. It's very conversational for the question. So we'd love to help with anything that might have come up. Okay, so for those of you who might have just gone on, I think Rabbi is going to maybe share again the document into the whole chat. Go ahead and download that document. You don't need it for today. So if you have any trouble downloading, don't worry about it. It will be sent in an email on Monday, along with a survey that we'd love for you to take. And today's session, like I said, will completely focus on oral histories, what they are, why they're helpful, and as well how to prep for one, how to conduct one, and of course, how to preserve that interview. So, what is an oral history interview or an oral history? So oral history is a field of study, and it's a unique communication between two individuals exchanging information through questions and answers. It's not necessarily a conversation or an ordinary conversation. Its purpose is to gather historical information. So it's important to remember the purpose is to gather historical information. Oral history enables people to share their stories in their own words, with their own voices, and through their own understanding of what happened and why. In truth, it's the oldest type of historical inquiry. Of course, it predates the written word. We can think of, especially in Judaism too, the oral history is a really important piece to our history. But in the last 50 or 60 years, with new technology and associations and structure, it's become a lot more formal in how we do oral histories. So it covers as a field not only interviews, which we will focus on today, but it looks at folklore, oral tradition, memoirs, firsthand accounts. That's all part of oral history. And something I think is so valuable, and we'll talk more about this, is the power of recording the voices of people who are not typically found in the history books or the archives. We get to preserve the experience of a more inclusive memory rather than those who are in positions of power, whose letters or things usually get saved. For example, and you might have heard of this project before, it was called the 67 Project. And it was a collaboration of different historical agencies in Detroit that did a huge oral history project a few years ago and collected oral histories from people retelling their experiences from the summer of 1967 in Detroit. And it's such an impactful collection that they have now to really understand the scope of what happened that summer. So why take an oral history? So oral histories provide a fuller and more accurate picture of the past by augmenting the information that's provided by public records, which are also important, we know. Eyewitnesses to events can contribute various viewpoints and perspectives that can fill in those gaps in the documented history and are a conduit to people whose stories have been untold or forgotten. Of course, humans, there can be flaws in oral history. As we know, memories fade, there can be a personal bias, or even, media over time can influence someone's memory of a big event that might have happened. And these are important points to keep in mind, both as an interviewer and a listener of an oral history. But still, there is incredible value, and the individual's perspective really is important to that bigger picture. So I like to think of it as a puzzle to the puzzle to history, and in many cases, it'll be a piece to the puzzle of your genealogy. So you can think of when you have a document which tells the story of someone's birth, maybe it's a wedding or any sort of document, but the oral history is going to help tell that story. So it really brings life to the data and the facts, and you can hear and connect better to the emotion and experience of a person rather than just the date on a piece of paper, and that's why they work so well together. Oral histories contribute to the preservation of voices from typically undocumented communities, which is also really valuable. And at times, an interview may be the only source of information available about a certain place or event or person. So whether you're interested in genealogy or not, I highly recommend, and of course, if you're here, I have a feeling you are, but I recommend interviewing family members from all different eras, because if you wait until later, it might be too late and you won't be able to save those memories. And I'm handing off to Rabbi.
Okay, hi everyone. So I get the fun task today of talking about some of the recording methods. So I get kind of the more difficult task of talking about some text stuff. Now, I do want to mention there's always that option of a written history where you could just literally take a paper, write questions, have someone write their answers. But today we're really talking about those audio and video methods of recording your oral history. I do want to preface this by saying we are going to get technical here. And I know some of us feel like we're not super tech savvy. I don't want you to worry about that. The main reason we're going over this is I really feel like you need to understand a little bit about the tech stuff, because we want you to just be familiar with this. So if you come across any of this, and you will if you're working with audio and video files, that it's not the first time you've seen these terms before. We just kind of really want you to have an understanding of it. You don't have to memorize anything, and on your cheat sheet that we've sent out, there's some notes about it. So I don't want you to worry too much about this. And of course, any questions at the end, please let me know. This is also going to help when you're having questions about some of your files, as far as kind of your old movies, that sort of thing, because you might come across some of these terms. So let's talk about audio and video. Audio recordings are going to probably be your most cost-effective way of recording an oral history. And that's just capturing voice. It's not capturing images. But you can make really good audio recordings using your phone or a cheap digital recorder. I want to just show, this is a little digital recorder I have for audio oral histories. It costs less than $100. It's small. It's like 2 inches by 4 inches. And it does a great quality. There are some things when you're choosing your device you really need to think about. One thing is storage space. A good recorder is going to have a lot of memory capacity, so that you don't have a problem where you have to, like in the middle of it, you fill up your device and you have to start deleting files right in the middle of your interview. So you want to make sure you have a lot of storage space. You want to make sure it's easy to share the files. And what I mean by that is that you don't want to struggle to move your interview from your recording device to another device. So let's just say your computer, let's say you use this little digital recorder, you need to get now that file to your computer. You want it to be easy. A lot of these devices, you just use a USB cord, it's very simple. So just when you're looking for a recorder, see how you can get it to another device. Audio quality. You want to have excellent audio quality to make sure you're capturing the subject's voice. You want to look for a device that filters out ambient or peripheral noise, and that they are sensitive enough to pick up sounds from a wide range and can be easily heard when you play it back on a speaker or headphone. And I will say that this tiny little recorder I have actually works great. On the top right here on each side, there is microphones. They have a great range. They pick up at a distance. So it doesn't have to be an external microphone. You can use a device with a built-in microphone. Let's talk about file types. So a file type is what kind of file it is, what kind of file it is, and it determines how you can open it and how you can play it. So for instance, if you've ever typed a Word document, if you've noticed when you type a Word document and save it, after your file name, it says .doc or .docx. This is a file type, and it indicates to anyone who looks at that file that it's a Word document. If you see .pdf, it means it's a PDF document. This is the same thing for audio and video files. They have extensions that explain what type of file they are. So I'm going to talk about some of the most common files that you are going to see when you're doing audio and video files. And again, I don't want to, I'm trying not to get too technical here, but I just want you to be familiar with this so that if you are doing a recording and you see this, you'll know how to deal with it. So let's start with audio files. The most common audio file you'll probably run across today is going to be an MP3. And if you've ever downloaded music, you're probably familiar with this. MP3s are good. They're compatible with nearly every device. And it is usually a manageable size. It's usually a compressed file. So what that basically means is that it's a little bit easier to share. The bigger the file size, the harder it can be to kind of share your file. So if you've ever maybe tried to email a photo, for instance, and you click send and it pops up and says file size too large, that's what we're talking about. So you just kind of want to pay attention to file size. If you're going to send this to a lot of family members, you know, if you're doing a family, you do want to keep that in mind. A WAV file is from a window-based system. It's generally an uncompressed file, meaning it's large. And this can be very difficult to send through something like email. For this, you'd probably have to send it through a file sharing platform like Dropbox or Google Drive or any of the other file sharing sites. The WMA is Windows Media Audio. It's a Windows-based product. It's good quality, but it's not necessarily that popular because it can be hard to share for people who don't use the Windows operating system, like your Mac users. The M4A, you might see if you're using your iPhone to do a recording. You'll see it will say saving as an MPEG-4, but it's an M4A. And you can open it on iTunes, QuickTime. You actually can open it on Windows Media Player. So if you're using your iPhone. There are a number of sites you can convert files from. So let's just say you've done it on a WAV file and you can't get it to send, the file's too large. You can convert it to an MP3 on your computer. And there are a number of free sites if you just look for conversion sites to do that. And I will say my trusty little recorder here, it will only record a WAV file. So if I'm sending this out, I'll usually convert it after the fact. I want to mention one of the sites I use, Handbrake, HANDBRAKE. That's a site I use to do things like convert and compress the files to make them smaller. If you have to do a little editing on your audio files, and I will talk about this after video, Audacity, AUDACITY, is a free program you can download that I use to edit audio files. And if you don't know how to do any sort of editing, you will find plenty of tutorials on YouTube. Okay, let's talk about common video files now. So video, before I talk about the file types, I just want to put out videos can be both a good way, an expensive way, sometimes an inexpensive way to do oral histories. The most expensive way to do a video oral history, of course, is hiring a videographer, which could cost you anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for a session. But there are some benefits. They're going to do everything for you. You just have to show up. They're going to do the camera work. They're going to do the lighting. It's great timing on the lighting. They're going to do the lighting. They will handle the sound. They will hand you a deliverable file in a file format that you can share. So that's the plus side of doing a videographer. But again, it's expensive. But you can do it yourself. You could use a video recorder, your phone. I would just say if you're using a device on your own, just use a stand, because if you have someone hold a camera, most likely their hands are going to shake, and then you're going to have a shaky interview. That's not that fun to watch. Also, nowadays, as we can see, as we've been doing Zoom for these many months, you can record on Zoom. So that's another great way you could actually do an oral history with someone across the country, or even at this time during the pandemic, your next door neighbor. So it's a great new way we can record oral histories. Let's get back to the file types on videos. So the most common you'll probably see is MP4. This is a good digital format. A lot of devices support MP4s, most of them do. MP4s can actually hold audio, video, still images, and text. And it also is relatively small file sizes, so it is a good format. MOV is another popular format designed by Apple, and it's compatible. Oops, sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off today, so it's going to ring for a second. I apologize about that. I'm going to mute myself for just one moment while this rings. I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to take it off the hook now. I was on MOV files, right? So MOV designed by assigned by Apple. It's compatible with QuickTime players for both Mac and Windows. It's high quality. It is significantly large files. It's going to be harder to send, and you might have to convert your MOV to an MP4 in order to really share it with a lot of people easily. WMV is designed by Microsoft, and it's widely used in Windows Media Player. It does have a small size, and it has good compression, but it's not always compatible with Apple devices, although you can download a Windows Media Player on your iPhone and Mac. But it might be harder for Mac users to download, or they would have to download an app in order to even play it. So you want to consider that when you're if you choose a WMV. So you might want to edit your file. So there are some software. I would check. Sometimes Windows systems, Macs come with a video editing software that's free. So you might want to check out what your personal operating system has for free video editing software. The one I use here in the archives is Adobe Premiere Pro. That is a paid subscription through Adobe, and I don't necessarily recommend it. It can be a little harder to use, but there's tons of tutorials on YouTube. Now, you would not normally edit a oral history. And the reason I'm kind of telling you this is sometimes something happens, like in the middle of an interview, someone coughs for like 5 minutes straight and you just want to edit that out. Or someone leaves to use the restroom for a few minutes and you don't turn off the recording. I actually had one instance in an audio recording. I had someone record an audio oral history for me. And then when they came to return the recorder, they forgot to turn it off, and they stopped and talked to people. And there's about a half an hour at the end of the oral history of her just talking to people in the hallway. So I did edit that out. You never want to edit the content of the oral history, because then you have just basically turned your primary source into a secondary source by making decisions of what should and shouldn't stay in the oral history. So you really only want to edit if something happens during the oral history, or maybe you recorded in 2 different sessions and you just want to put them back to back. So you want to keep your oral history as real as possible. So now that I have completely probably glazed you over with some tech stuff, I'm going to turn it back to Laura with some fun stuff.
Yes. Okay. Well, the tech stuff, though, yes, is very technical. It's very important. And so thank you, Rabbi, for going into that. Okay. So let's talk venue. Now, I love the style. I don't know if any of you are NPR listeners, but where like the NPR is interviewing someone and you can hear like what they do in the background and it's all fun and you kind of get a vibe for where they are working. That is not what we want for an oral history. For this, we want it to be comfortable for the interviewee, so the person you're interviewing, and we want it to be quiet. It is really important that you avoid places like coffee shops. Make sure that if you're in someone's home, that the dishwasher isn't running, you want to make sure any of the distractions that happen are turned off. All the phones are turned off. And you want to get rid of any distractions for the person and for the audio. So both of those are important. And the interviewer should sit a comfortable distance from the subject with the recording device in between them. Or if there's an audio, of course, it's a video. There's, you want it to be, thank you for the typo on the screen. I apologize for that. Yes, we want it to be quiet. So if there's a video, the camera should be facing the subject. The person doing the interview should not necessarily be on camera. We want it to be focused on the person who is being interviewed. If you are using audio only, you want to make sure it's in between. Either way, you want both people to be able to be heard on the equipment, which means you want to test the equipment and test it again. You want to test anything you might be bringing to the venue, make sure it's working, make sure it's charged. And when you get there, do a test film or do a test audio, play a couple seconds and make sure that wherever it's sitting in between you two, that it's picking up both the question and the answer. If it needs batteries, have extra batteries. If it needs a charger, make sure that the plug that you're charging it into works, things like that. You want to really make sure you're going through all of those things so you don't lose half the interview in the middle of it. And once you begin recording, this is actually a really important thing. The first thing you're going to want to say is, this is the interviewer, and you name yourself, and you name the interviewer, where you are, and what the date is. So that's the first thing when you start the recording, you're saying, this is Laura Williams. I'm here interviewing Rabbi Terman. We're on Zoom. I'm in Southfield, Michigan, and she is in the Leonard and Simons Jewish Community Archives on, what is today's date? January 21st. So that way, if for some reason that recording, the file, gets a different name or loses its name or is found somewhere else, that whoever opens up that file or that audio file video, that they know exactly what they're listening to. And it's not just I don't know who they're talking to, if only I knew. So make sure that they know who is on that tape. I think I got everything there. Yes. Okay. So then questions. So this is a big one, right? When we're talking about oral histories, it's really important to know and be prepared for what we're going to ask. And it is not as easy as it sounds. It feels like it might be just a casual conversation. You want to learn about your grandparents or your sister's life or whatever you want to record it. It's actually, you want to do a good amount of prep work. What are you going to ask? Well, it depends on why you're interviewing someone. Is it strictly for genealogy purposes? Are you a historian who's trying to round out a historic record? The reason, and again, going back to that purpose for the interview, is going to help you form your questions. And just to help you along, we do have a sample list of questions that is in that doc that Rabbi had shared, that's in the chat, as well as will be emailed to you. So if you've registered, you'll get the email with that document. Those questions are mostly geared toward genealogy, and they're going to help you formulate something that is going to go into a family archive. It's a few pages, and you don't have to use all the questions. They're really just kind of to help you get started. And if, of course, you don't get that for some reason, please email us. So prep. If it is a parent or a close family member, you probably already know a lot about their life, their background, generally the types of jobs or they had, places they lived, that kind of thing. But if not, and even can help to do a little more, it's good to do a little bit of research on the person that you're interviewing. Knowing a bit about where they're from or what they did or important moments in their life is going to help you touch on that in the interview. You don't want to totally miss that they were part of some incredible event and you totally skip that altogether, right? You want to make sure that you know some of those highlights that you want to include in this oral history. If you're writing your own questions, here are just some tips about formulating the question. You want to ask a who, what, where, when, or why. For example, who was the person who has influenced you most as a child? Follow up being why. Avoid leading questions. You don't want to do you liked flying airplanes, right? You don't want to put words into their mouth before they say it. You don't want to take away from the organic answer that they might be giving about their experience flying planes. A 2-question format can be helpful to kind of set the stage. So you can say, you were a teenager during the Great Depression. How did that affect your daily life? So now they're putting themselves in that kind of time period you're asking them about, and then you ask the question that goes with it. You don't want to inject personal judgments or biases into the question. So something like, tell me what it was like growing up in the Great Depression and how it was the worst era to be raised in. Because now you're assuming things about how they felt about it. And, we obviously don't want their answer to be changed or them to feel judged or anything. So you want to keep it as open and free from judgment as possible. It's good to clarify personal or physical descriptions whenever possible. So if they mention they grew up in Northwest Detroit, you can say, you grew up in Northwest Detroit, describe your street. And make sure that if they're talking about something, they're excited, or it's something interesting, follow up. Just because it's not on your sheet does not mean it's not an important thing to learn about their lives. So you can follow up with so you said it was a very Jewish street. Describe what that was like, or how is your home Jewish, or how, you can keep going on that topic. So an interview, the questions you formulate are important, but they're not strict. Okay, tips and tricks to make a great interview. The first one is really be quiet and listen. The interview is not a dialogue. It is not you two exchanging your life experiences. This is about you asking a question that's going to help them tell their story the best. So other than asking the questions or follow-ups, you really want to stay quiet and you want to hear and get as much out of the person you're interviewing as possible. I didn't change this. So we don't want not conversational questions. We want to keep it easy. Start with very light questions. Maybe you're interviewing a family member and you don't want to bring up things like, hey, you went to jail on your 21st birthday, and make them uncomfortable. You want to make sure that you're asking lighter questions in the beginning, and make sure that the subject is as comfortable as possible, and you'll get a better interview. Stay attentive, listening closely, showing interest with your eyes, it sounds like kind of just like, of course you would do that, but you want to make sure that the interviewee knows that you're listening to them, and it's going to help them want to keep talking to you, because if they think you're distracted or, on your phone or something like that, of course, they're going to feel neglected and not want to keep talking. So full attention is really, really important. This can be hard, especially if you're talking to a family member, but we don't want to interrupt the answer, especially because they could be giving a really good response. But just because they're straying from your outline, you don't want to interrupt them. So let them finish the thought. It could be going somewhere really interesting. Now, there's also a balance to that. If the interviewee is totally straying into non-pertinent subjects and they are talking about something that has nothing to do or giving an opinion on, you know when it's going to be not important to historical records. So just keep reminding yourself of the purpose of the interview and keeping the balance between letting them tell you something you weren't expecting and just completely going off on a tangent that has nothing to do with anything. And then you can gently bring them back to the main subject, or maybe re-ask the question, so that there's not 20 minutes of a tangent that isn't helpful. Don't let periods of silence frustrate you. It's sometimes a interviewee is going to need a moment to really recall the events that you're asking them about. Just because they aren't answering doesn't mean they don't have an answer. So we have this instinct, right, to be like, let me ask that again, or let me ask it in a different way, or we can talk about something else. Like, they might just need a moment to collect their thoughts. Taking notes is important. We want to keep attention, but there are some moments where you're really going to want to jot some things down. Two of those kind of very obvious things are people and places. So you don't want to interrupt someone in the middle of talking to ask for the spelling, but you're going to want to know if they mentioned a place or a person that you don't know how to, you maybe never heard of, you want to make sure you get the spelling correct. You're going to want to jot it down and ask them when the interview is over. So that's just a helpful little thing to keep while you're doing your interview. Kind of mentioned this before, be prepared for follow-up on unexpected avenues of information. Maybe you never knew that your grandmother worked in a factory during World War II because it wasn't in your outline, but it's something interesting and pursue it. So definitely if you're picking up on something that's interesting or has historical value, go for it. And we'll talk about it. You can always schedule another session. If information from the interviewee appears to be false, this can be a challenge. Don't challenge that point, especially when they're making it. If possible, you can point out maybe that there's a conflicting story over the issue, but they could have just made a mistake. For instance, if they were talking about the summer of 1967, but they're saying, Detroit had riots in 1965, you might say something like clarifying, I just want to clarify, did you mean 1967? And little things like that you can do, but you don't want to just flat out tell them that they said something wrong. But there could be times when they just flat out say something wrong and you don't want to blow the whole interview. For instance, if the subject insists that their father used to take them as a child to run alcohol across to Canada during Prohibition, but the person wasn't born until after Prohibition, there is an inherent bias in oral history because it depends on the personal memory and experience. So you do have to view oral histories with a grain of salt, check the facts as a researcher, and we'll talk about more about adding in things during a transcript if you're going to type up a transcript about it, but you don't really want to stop someone in the middle and tell them that they're wrong because it might completely make them want to stop talking altogether. So maintain an atmosphere where your interviewee is relaxed and responsive. So another reason why telling them that they are getting something wrong is not going to be helpful, but you want to make sure that you're continuously reassuring and asking questions in a way that's relaxing. Don't worry if you are fumbled or you poorly phrased a question, as long as the interviewee understands what you're asking them and they give a content and they give a response, that's what is most important. Their answer is what matters. The way you ask the question or if you said it awkwardly, don't worry about that. Try to avoid off the record information. Interviewees may feel more comfortable relating their story to you before recording it. And there's still a chance to request that the story be told on and recorded. This goes into a little bit of, sometimes you'll do a pre-interview, which we'll talk about, but try to avoid off the record things. You really want to, kindly ask them to let it be put on the record if it's a story they're willing to talk about. Interviews are usually more successful if the interviewee is alone when they're being recorded. So you can imagine that if your son or daughter was in the room with you, that you might change the way that you answer a question, or a spouse even. You don't want that to be happening. You want the interviewee to be alone and really remembering their own thoughts and not be influenced by other people in the room. End each interview at a reasonable time. So most interviews are from an hour to 2 hours, 2 really being the max you want to do for one sit down. If there's more information you want after, you can absolutely schedule another interview. It's not uncommon to do that. If there's a lot where you're doing a family history and you want to really know your mother's life, it's totally normal to do it, but you don't really want to have them sitting there for 6 hours telling their family or their history. Again, after you finish recording, that's the time to make sure that you check any spellings with the subject. And one last time saying, remember the purpose of the interview is to enhance the historical understanding of this person or events. But it's not meant to force them to answer or explain anything. They have control over the stories that they want to tell. So, what they offer is what they're going to offer. And as a child, you might have the opportunity to ask for more, or as a family member, you can kind of poke a little bit more than maybe someone who doesn't know the other person. But generally, you really want this to be something that they are comfortable with from start to finish. So keep that in mind, that the purpose is to let them tell their story. Okay, transcripts. So this can, there could be a whole session, honestly, on writing transcripts, but we'll do a little overview. It is really helpful to write, or to type really, a word-for-word transcript after the interview. If you're not comfortable on a computer or don't want to spend the hours of time that it can take to do this, there are services, things like rev.com. It charges $1.25 per minute of recording. So if you think of an hour-long thing, I can't do that math, but it's a reasonable thing if you want a transcript. The turnaround time is about a day or two. But there are just a few tips for writing a transcript. So if you want to do it yourself, there are different services, software that you can use to help slow down, and I'll include those. I think they're included in the PDF, and if not, I'll add them at the end, where you can upload your file and it will slow down the recording so you can type it out much easier. It'll have, like a certain key is pause so you can keep typing. So there's things that can help you specifically write out a transcript, and you can also search those, of course. And so little things are about corrections and how to, it's when you're doing an interview and someone speaks and they're saying something grammatically incorrect, or the structure of the sentence is, kind of funky, there's the want to correct it. We don't want to do that. If you can understand what the sentence is saying, keep it the way it is, keep it in the way that they speak. It's important to stay as close to what they're talking about as possible. If, I say as I'm reading the word if someone has 5 ums in a row, you don't need to keep all of the ums, but there are moments where you want to show maybe that they have hesitation in what they're saying. It's a little bit of a judgment call, but generally you want to keep what they're saying. And you don't want to correct facts in the transcript. So if they said the summer of 1965, you don't want to edit it and say 1967, but you might, like I see on the like it's on the screen right there, put brackets around the correct date. Or maybe they say we went down to the parade down in Detroit, and they were talking about the Thanksgiving parade. You could maybe put in, the brackets Thanksgiving parade if you want to explain something, but make sure anything that you are putting into a transcript has those brackets, and it's very clear that that's not what the person said, that's what you're putting in. The reason transcripts are so helpful is kind of like what Robbie's talking about with all of the different tech needs and the migration. So if something is old and it's going from CD to DVD to USB to cloud, whatever it is, the migration of it, that things can get changed or lost or whatever can happen to technology, having a Word document or PDF, whatever you create, is going to be so helpful. You can print it out, you can have it online. It's just another source to preserve the words that those people are speaking. The other just fun thing about having a Word doc is you can keyword search right into a Word doc and say you want to hear when they were talking about when they went to Mumford High School, and you can just keyword search Mumford High School and you'll find where in the transcript they're talking about it. And again, this is a very quick overview of transcripts, but I do recommend either using a service or creating a transcript yourself, because it can be really helpful for preservation and research.
Okay, so I get to talk about release forms. I'm just going to quickly say that we recommend that you do a release form for an oral history. Oral history falls under the same law as copyright, and the copyright law is that it lasts the life of, in the case, the subject, plus an additional 70 years after their life. You might think that you're doing an oral history with a grandparent or a parent, and no one needs a release. But think about it this way. Let's say that you interview your grandfather who was in World War II, and he tells a great story. And after he passes, you think people should know about this, and I want to donate it to the World War II archive. Well, if they don't have a release, it's going to be very hard for them to ever use it, because they would literally not have the right under copyright to ever share it, publish it or really pretty much do anything with it. So the release is just really protecting you and them so that you can use this interview for usually, I mean, pretty much just educational purposes. I have some of the things that you want to have on the copyright form. And in the next slide, I'm going to actually show you an example. Actually, I'm going to show you it now. This release form example is in the packet that I uploaded, and I will upload again after we go off the share in case anyone who's coming in late missed it in the chat. It's also going to be in the packet that gets emailed to you next week. But this is just an example. It does not have to have a ton of stuff, but you're basically just asking for permission from the subject to use the oral history. And you can see I put some of the reasons that how it might be used, whether it's for research, educational purposes, publication, exhibit display, to migrate to new technology, to donate to a library and archive. If you have anything on here and the person objects to anything, you can write in a restriction. Like the person might say, I'm okay with using it for research, but I don't want it published. And so you can write a restriction in here. Okay, preserving files long-term. So obviously we want to make sure that these files are preserved, because especially when you're interviewing a person, if they pass away, you don't want to, find out that you lost their interview file. So as soon as possible after you do the interview, upload this to your computer. That's just going to be easiest for you to work off your computer if you have to do any conversions or editing. Then you want to make sure you are backing it up. So we talked about in archives, you back up in 3 places. Well, maybe you don't have to back up to 3 places, but at least back up so you have at least 2 copies. And this could be a USB, a flash drive. It could be an external drive. It could be the cloud. But I wouldn't recommend a CD or a DVD because those are obsolete technologies. And I just do want to caution about one thing, because I think there's some misunderstanding about the cloud, and people think they can just put everything in the cloud. It will never go away. It will be there forever. And they only need the cloud and nothing else. And that's just not true. The cloud is basically renting space on someone else's server. So the company that is running that server could go out of business. They could have a new product and stop supporting that cloud. It could crash. All these things have happened. It's documented to have happened. And if something happens, if they go out of business, if they stop supporting your cloud service, they may tell you or they may not. And all of a sudden you go and everything is gone. So you need to have a service, a way to back up besides the cloud. So a cloud is fine for one backup, but there should be a second backup. I also want to just talk about digital lifespan, which is not long at all. If you take care of your paper files, if we store them correctly, as we've talked about over the last few weeks, you could put them in a box and store them correctly and they'll last for hundreds of years. You're lucky if a digital file lasts 5 years. So you really have to pay attention to technology, and you want to be, looking at what the next thing is. So right now, MP4 is the most popular video file. Is that going to be the most popular video file in 50 years? Probably not. We all used floppy disks at one point. Can anyone open a floppy disk? I can't. So you have to constantly be backing up or migrating to whatever the newest technology is when it comes to digital files. And remember, this is something you are passing down. You will have to migrate this for the rest of your life, then your kids, then your grandkids, and so on, to make sure these are saved. So just keep in mind, we're all like, yes, digitize everything. Digitizing is great. Yes, on one hand, it's great to have that backup and to be able to easily share. But on the other hand, you have so much more management over the rest of eternity when it comes to digital files. So just keep that in mind when you are creating digital files. It is a lot of work. So that's the end of our oral history. But before we take questions, I am just going to pass this over to Laura to talk about this exciting new project that we have.
Yes, so Rabbi and I teamed up on this project called the COVID-19 Archives Project. And it is a community effort that we are, as the two big community archives, trying to collect experiences and information about right now, living through COVID-19 and this pandemic and the world that we're in right now. And I know it feels very fresh, but that's why we want to collect the information, is because 100 years from now, people are going to really, really want to know how we lived and how we experienced this time. And I can say for certain, even this year, we've looked compared and looked back a lot at 1918 and wondered how the flu pandemic of 1918 impacted people's lives. And I could only wish that 100 years from now that people will have our experiences preserved and be able to look back and understand what this year felt like and how it impacted us. So there's a few ways that you can contribute to the COVID-19 archives. This is the website. We'll include this also in that email if you don't get a chance to jot it down. But there is an opportunity to take oral histories. So if, for those of you who have just gone through this training, we have special questions set up for oral histories to talk about this experience that you could upload. We're asking for photos and documents of experiences. So if you had a wedding or a bar mitzvah that was a drive-by, that we are asking to collect those photos so we can have images of what life was like, or even daily life, taking a picture of your kids at school at this time. And the other thing is, even if you don't have any materials or want to contribute like an actual file, we have a questionnaire that we're asking everyone who's able to go ahead and answer the questions that you feel comfortable asking. We're asking you about your experience right now, how it's impacted the community, how it's impacted your world. And we want to kind of collect that information and just get a better picture for how this community is living through the pandemic. So please, if you can, donate any sort of that, whether it's your time, an oral history, any documents. That would be very helpful if you would go ahead and go to this website. It's just now debuting. We're just getting it up now. So it'll be here for a long time, hopefully, to give you time to do that. But please jot that down and visit. If you have any questions, let us know. And Robbie, if I miss anything, please add it.
No, I think you got everything. So I think it is time for questions. And again, we have our contact information here, but don't worry, it's also on the handout. So we are gonna start answering your questions. So I'm gonna take off the shared screen so we can see each other a little better. And I actually will go ahead, I think, and also one more time upload the documents for everyone, that that handout that you will also receive by email. So just give me a moment to find it. Okay, here you go. Okay.
Wonderful. So we have a couple questions, and of course, if you have them now, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll add them to our list. Someone asked if there's any way to get a voicemail off of an iPhone into another device, and there is. I won't go into too much detail. I assume maybe someone left an important message, but if you go to your voicemail and you go to the little info, or you click the voicemail, there's the little share button, just like if you're going to share a photo or anything, and it will let you could share to your drive, you could send it to an email, you could upload it, airdrop it to your computer. But yes, you absolutely can share a voicemail from an iPhone. They actually make it pretty easy. You can even send it in a text to someone who might be maybe more tech savvy to put it where you're wanting it to end up. So yes, you can share an iPhone voicemail.
Let's see, there's a question about videotaping an interview years ago. He started to tape over the tapes that they lost a little. Is it worth editing? You always have to decide if it's worth editing to you. I mean, it's not always easy to edit. You have to have a little bit of skills in that area. So you have to just decide if it's worth it to you, really. That's a personal choice. Recommendations for converting old cassette tape recordings into digital. Yeah, so there are companies that do that kind of conversion. You can do it from You can do it yourself if you have the equipment. Now, I will say in the archives, we don't do it ourselves. It just would take up too much time and energy for me to do by myself. I do send it to a vendor. Um, so,
Someone mentioned in the chat that you can buy a cassette to USB adapter inexpensively. I've never done that, but yes, that's
yeah, there are ways you can do it at home. I will be honest, we don't even have I don't even have a cassette player here. That's how old that technology is, right? I don't have a cassette player. So we send our old media to a vendor who specializes in it. And it can be very good because some of this old technology, like for instance, we had some issues. We sent out some really old film reels to a vendor, 8mm and 16mm film. And it was so old, it was breaking, but they repaired it because that's what they do. So that can be a benefit to sending it out to a professional vendor.
yes.
Can you tell us the vendor's name?
Yes, I can put it. Yeah, I have this card here on my desk.
Okay, so while she's getting the contact, and I assume you'll type it into the chat, Rabbi.
Yes.
I'll just move to the next question, which is what should you do with an existing oral history? And it definitely depends. I don't know if you're trying to convert it, because we could talk about the different ways, maybe sending it to a company. If you would like to donate it, archives and libraries, especially us archives, if you're in this Detroit Jewish community, would accept an oral history as part of our collection. So it just depends on, do you mean, for your own collection? How do you get it to where you want it to be? But it would probably be, if you have it and you're trying to put it into your own collection, it might just mean migrating to the best technology, or putting it to a digital copy, or sending it to get a transcript. There's a lot of different options you can do depending on what's your end goal for the oral history. And if you want to email either one of us to talk about that, I'd be happy to help.
I've just put up the information of the vendor I use, Wall Street Productions, Tim Roshan. Tim at wallstreetproductions.com is his email address. He will, if you tell him exactly what you have, he'll give you a quote. His office is in Southfield, so it's very easy to drop it off to him to get things done. And I've been happy with the quality of what I've gotten back from him, and he takes very good care of your media. And I know I've seen online and I've seen advertising for other companies that do it. I haven't used them, so I can't really remark on those. Did you answer? I'm sorry, while I was typing,
I didn't answer the professional. No, I don't know if I have a good
recommendation. Okay, so the professional interviewer, there might be a service. I would say you have to decide if you're why you're doing the interview and why you feel you need a professional interviewer. If you think it's something, for instance, that let's say they were part in Detroit during the '67 riot, and you really want a professional who's going to get out those stories and get really good historical information that's going to be useful to researchers, see if you can contact an archive that does oral histories and is doing the type of work that you want to share, because they're going to be trained in doing oral history. So for instance, we do oral histories here. We do training sessions. My volunteers that do the oral histories go through a training process in order to do them. So I would say if you feel it might be something that is important enough to to give to an archive, see if an archive has an oral history program. Let's see, it said I
think that might be all the questions. That's all I collected.
Oh, so. Yeah, I had one. Joel, I will email you about your question, Joel.
Okay, so unless we have any other questions, I think that might be it.
From the last couple of weeks also, that any follow-up from the photographs or documents, since this is our last class.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you all so much for being here. Whether it was one or all three sessions, it was really nice to have you. Of course, you have our contact info. We are always happy to help if things come up as you start doing these projects or anything else comes up that has to do with archives. It was really great to partner with Rabbi, so thank you so much. This was a really fun program to do. And look out for that survey so that we can know how to do these more in the future that are going to better serve you all and get your interests and what you thought. So please look out for that email. I believe it'll be coming on Monday with the survey and this packet with all the good highlights. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
It's been quite helpful. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Thank you very much.